Welcome back to the Pride and Puck podcast. This is season number 2, episode 14. We are part of Hockey Hype Australia and part of the Hockey Hype Australia podcast network. You can find us at www.hockeyhypeaustralia.com.au, Pride and Puck pod on the socials, Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. Welcome back for another episode. Really excited about this one. We are returning home to Australia after going abroad to North America for the last 2 episodes. And we have someone on today who a lot of people will actually know within hockey here in Australia. Sydney Sirens current goaltender, Ella Licari. Welcome to the podcast.
Thanks, Andrew. Hi.
What's been happening with you post Australian Women's Ice Hockey League season?
Let's see. So we're back playing Ice Hockey New South Wales Women's League for the winter. I'm playing for Canterbury this year, the Canterbury Eagles. We've played 3 or 4 games so far. I've moved house since the season ended, and also lots of work. Throughout the AW season, you kind of make some sacrifices with work and life, and once the season's finished, you kind of rebalance.
Moving's always fun.
Yeah, it's the wrong kind of fun.
You are obviously a trans woman. You are regarded as a trailblazer within Australian ice hockey or Australian hockey broader, because we'll talk about some inline stuff as well. What does it mean to you when you hear something like that within the sport here?
Yeah, look, I guess it was a really difficult thing when I was very early in transition, and I decided that I wanted to play hockey at a high competitive level, and I didn't really know where I would fit, because I didn't really see anyone else in my position playing at anything greater than club level. Having previously played very competitively, it was something I wanted to return to, but it was really daunting, not knowing where to start or who I could talk to about what my options were.
And your hockey journey or your hockey career, I know that your father was born in Italy and migrated over to Australia. Was your father a hockey player? Because that's where it started for you. Was your father a hockey player in Italy, or did that sort of happen once he had moved over to WA? Can you just talk us through starting your ice hockey journey?
Yeah, sure. My dad was born in Italy. He actually migrated when he was very young, 2 or 3 years old. He did play ice hockey before I was born. But some of my earliest memories were of going and watching games that he would referee. And so I think he'd stopped playing before I was born also. But when I think there was a gap between in Perth, there was an ice rink called the Premier Ice Rink, and when that closed down, the Mirrabooka Ice World ice rink was opened, and I know that he was excited about the prospect of getting back involved with hockey, but instead of playing, he got involved with refereeing. So I don't know how old I was. It would have been maybe 4 or 5 years old the first time I would go down and watch him referee. And it was as normal to me as, I guess, anything for an Aussie kid these days, whether it be soccer or football or t-ball. That was just my regular thing. And on a Sunday afternoon, I would go down and watch the games that he would referee, and I'd hang out with him a little bit in the referees' change room. And whilst the game was playing, I would be freezing ringside watching the hockey and idolizing the goalies.
Um, just on that, on your father, once your playing career is finished, could you see yourself actually becoming a referee more actively? I'm not sure if you referee now, but more actively.
I haven't refereed in recent times, but I have refereed at the inline national level when I was much younger, and yeah, I definitely could see myself. Whether or not I'd be any good, I'm not too sure. Um, I think some time has passed since the last time I refereed at a high level. But look, even if it's just at club level and giving back to the sport, because I know that it can be difficult getting officials sometimes for all levels of hockey. So yeah, look, I can't see myself stopping hockey and not having anything to do with it, whether it be refereeing or coaching or something. But yeah, look, I'd like to think that I could make a difference and bring something, uh, perhaps even to the AW.
And you did mention that you always wanted to be a goalie, and you were fixated on goalies, and it did make me laugh when we were talking before this podcast, because when you said you're fixated, someone that you know very well and I know very well, Sarah Doramaja, is very similar in terms of fixated on goalies and loves goalies. Um, where did that love come from early on? How did you know that you wanted to be a goalie?
It's a good question. I think I'm of the firm belief that you're either born a goalie or you're not. Um, when I'm coaching or I see a young goalie, I can pretty much pick up very quickly whether or not they are going to be a great goalie or if they're just going to be a goalie that has fun and not necessarily very competitive. But I don't know. It's something that I think you're born with. Um, it's kind of a bit of an X factor, I think.
And you did try your hand at not being a goalie. How was that for you?
Uh, Under protest, I always wanted to be a goalie, but my dad he said no. You need to learn to skate, and I was like, what do you mean? Goalies don't skate. Um, and also he said to think like a player, and I didn't really cotton on because I was 10 at the time. I didn't really cotton on to what he meant by that. But later in my hockey life, I started to understand that a lot of it came down to being solid and strong on your feet as a skater, but also knowing what's going on as far as the plays that develop, being able to anticipate what's happening. Um, Sometimes before it happens, you can see something developing. So I think having that knowledge and that perspective of being a player um, really did help me be a goalie. Um, so I was a player for about 2 or 3 years. Nothing spectacular. I wasn't a superstar. I would certainly have some goals here and there, but I wasn't a top superstar player.
And you had a pretty rapid rise in your goalie career. You were playing um, state level at quite a young age. And you did mention to me about the really old school sort of mentality within the locker room. Um, and it's a lot of those conversations I've had on this podcast with people that come on about that old school sort of culture. Um, Back in your younger days, did you have any idea about your gender identity back then? Was that something that you'd thought about back in your early days when you were exposed to that sort of old school culture?
I don't think I had that much of an idea, and I think that came out of being in an environment, and not just hockey, but family and the social environment that I grew up in, where it wasn't really very accepted to be different. So I think at an early age, I realized that I had to conform in some way. There was an expectation of me to be something, and what I made up about that was that I had to be super masculine and super strong, and certainly not what I see myself as today. So I think I probably emotionally and mentally ran away from anything that could potentially be that. So maybe it was just stifled well and truly before it even started.
And did you see a lot of people turned away from the sport because of those sort of situations?
I don't think I saw anything so much back then. Um, Growing up with uh, men's hockey, and that's kind of all I knew because there really wasn't any women's hockey to speak of. I do remember, a handful of girls and women that played, but it was it was not very visible. Um, so it was just normal. So being in a change room with, like you said, I was very young. I was probably 14, and the guys I was playing with were in their 20s, 30s, and it was a very masculine, what we would consider, I guess, toxic masculinity these days. It was very thick with toxic masculinity, smoking and drinking in the change rooms. Like it was about as masculine as you could imagine from uh, a stereotype perspective. If you watch movies like Slapshot, etc., it was that, and that was what it was like in the 80s and 90s.
Do you think it's changed a fair bit since those days? And you might not be able to answer this now that you're in the AW and that sort of thing. But do you think it's changed a lot? And do you think there's more of an openness within women's hockey than men's hockey still?
Yeah, I think it's definitely changed. Obviously, um, smoking isn't accepted, anywhere internally at any facility, as far as I'm aware. I think vaping is now a little bit easier to get away with, and I've heard some stories, that happening. But yeah, look, absolutely, I think times have definitely changed, and um, I guess from a culture perspective, have things changed that much? It's hard to say uh, from maybe a male changer perspective, but I've had nothing but full acceptance in my experience with women's hockey. Um, that was actually something very surprising to me, even early in my transition, uh, when I was less femininely presenting.
Um, and you've also had a really, really, really big and trying to find the word for it. Um, you've had a massive inline career too. And probably a lot of people probably don't realize your inline career. Can you let some of the viewers and listeners just know about your inline hockey career? Because most people will just think of you from an on ice perspective.
Yeah, sure. there was a period of time when I was a little bit disillusioned with ice hockey and some of the politics that was going on. And a group of friends and I decided to give ice hockey a little bit of a break. And one of my friends, fairly well known guy from Perth, Rick Cooper, um, he grew up in the US, and inline was kind of his thing when he was growing up, and he played at a reasonably high level over there. So he came up with the idea of checking out what Australia has to offer as far as inline goes, or at least in Perth where I was growing up. So we had a look around to see what there was, and I remember going along to one of the trainings that there was going on, and it was just a handful of people not doing very much, clumsily skating around, pushing pucks back and forth. And so we decided, well, let's make this a thing, and we poured our time and effort and heart and soul into making inline as good as it can be in Perth. And we got to a point where we started looking outside of Perth, and we found out that there was a national championships. It was at that time Roller Sports Australia, and they were more focused on artistic and speed skating. Um, they did have roller hockey, but the different style of roller hockey on quad skates. But they started introducing inline hockey, and inline hockey had been around in the nationals for a few years, and then we came along, and to my surprise, other states, Victoria, New South Wales, South Australia, they and Queensland, they all had inline teams, and very rapidly the national competition at nationals, year after year, just kept growing and growing, and it was quite the epic battle, often between WA and Victoria. I remember playing uh, several nationals back to back where we were either uh, fighting Victoria for the championships or defending the championship with Victoria. So they were really good times.
And how old were you through your inline stage? Because I do know that you were seeking to return to a colder ice rink. There were some warm inline rinks. How old were you through that stage when you returned to ice hockey after inline?
Um, it's a good question. I think I was in my early 20s. So I think I went to inline about 17 years old. And I came back to ice in my early 20s. You're right. It gets very hot, especially as a goalie. You're wearing exactly the same equipment that you wear uh, in ice hockey as you do in inline hockey as a goalie, and the heat sometimes, and some of those venues, they in summer they get to 30 degrees, and yeah, your hydration becomes quite a factor, and heat exhaustion.
And your full time job as well took you across to Canada, and you played hockey over in Ottawa while you're over there working. Do you think, and Canada is obviously the home of hockey, ice hockey. Do you think that's where you sort of got a love for the sport again, for the sport of ice hockey?
Definitely the life and culture of Canada and hockey, where it's seamlessly woven into everything. Um, we were playing hockey before work. Sometimes at lunchtime we would get out for a sneaky smack of the puck around the car park or something. And then after work, we would also play some pickup. So some days I had the opportunity to play, 3 times a day, which and also work a full day. So it was quite amazing. And then you go out at dinner time or um, on the weekend, and there's just hockey everywhere. There's hockey on the TV. So you're driving down the street, and the kids are playing in the converted tennis courts where they freeze them over overnight. And where we drive around here in Australia, and the kids are playing soccer in the parks. The kids are just playing outdoor hockey there. So it was I think a pivotal time, because it was actually around that time that I became aware of my gender identity situation. Um, so they were happening consecutively, falling back in love with ice hockey. Um, there's some great rinks in Ottawa, um, and a lot more to choose from in comparison to here in Australia. So yeah, it definitely helped me build my love for the sport again.
And how much did your the gender identity side of things did that sort of um, progress at a rapid rate once you'd moved back to Australia?
Yeah. Um, Short answer, yes. The longer answer is it was a very scary time. It was when you've lived 30 something years of your life thinking and believing that you are a uh, a certain identity, and then you realize that things are very different. Um, I remember feeling like my whole world was turned upside down. I was really fearful about what that would mean from a career perspective to friends and family, relationships. Um, it's very easy to catastrophize when you're presented with something so changing.
And you did eventually have facial feminization surgery as well. And there's an awesome story on facialteam .eu about you and your love for that facial team and what it's done for you. Can you just talk to our viewers and listeners about how much getting that done has changed your life? Because there'd be a lot of people obviously listening, questioning their gender identity and things like that. Um, how huge was it for you um, to have that done?
Yeah, look, I think it's important to say, first of all, obviously, surgery is a very big step. Um, you you really need to be certain about your decisions prior to undertaking something like that. But look, I guess early on in my transition, I did a lot of research. Those that know me, I research everything to death. It's just part of who I am. And I knew about facial feminization surgery and uh, a number of different surgeons and groups around the world that offered it, but a lot of them were really offering uh, cosmetic enhancements similar to plastic surgery for aesthetic reasons, and calling it facial feminization surgery. Where when I came across the facial team, they came to Sydney, where I was living at the time, and they were holding a conference for transgender people and their friends and family to come along and learn and understand a little bit more about essentially what happens with the human physiology when you go through puberty. And what I really resonated with the facial team is that their concept of facial feminization surgery is to undo or reverse the effects of puberty and the effects of testosterone. Uh, Obviously, puberty is a quite a changing time for anyone, but also when you've had uh, regular normal levels of testosterone acting on your body for decades, it leaves a physical aspect of you that is, in my case, very sort of masculine, very masculine features. So their surgery isn't about making you look like a pin-up model, but it's about removing the effects of the male puberty, and there are various features on a face that when we look at someone for the first time, within a third of a second, you think either masculine or feminine based on certain markers, certain features. And their surgery essentially focuses on that. They don't take away your identity. I still look like I did previously, but just a much more feminine version of that. When I saw their presentation, I was quite overwhelmed with what was possible, um, much more than I realized, and it moved very quickly for me. I made the the decision to go ahead with that, and I was very quickly. I think within 4 months, I was over in Spain to have my surgery, and it was one of the best experiences from a medical perspective I've ever experienced. They're so caring and understanding. They're very informative as well. They they're such amazing people. These two surgeons that started Facial Team, I think they could be making so much more money if they were in the standard mainstream cosmetic surgery business, but they've dedicated their lives to not just providing surgery, but developing new techniques to support trans women uh, present the way that they feel, and they're quite amazing people. Prior to COVID, I was seeing them quite regularly. They'd come out and catch up with them. Um, they also they sponsored me in the AW in my early years playing, so they've been really supportive and amazing people.
And 2017 was a big year for you. And when you returned from Spain, um, it wasn't that long after that you're off to Thailand um, for gender confirmation surgery, and you're also part of with reverting back to hockey here with the Sydney Bears Pride game. Um, were you surprised when you were asked to participate in the Sydney Bears Pride game, and what did it mean to you to have the Sydney Bears approach you?
Yeah, it was actually really surprising. I didn't even know the Sydney Bears knew who I was. Um, it was I believe the second after my second season playing with the Sirens. I know that I was reasonably well known in and around AW, but I didn't really know that the Bears knew who I was. So there was obviously an initiative in the AI to have these pride rounds, and when I was invited to come along, it was literally only, I believe, a week before I was heading off to Thailand for gender confirmation surgery there. So there was so many events happening in 2017 for me. It was such a whirlwind year, from playing AW to in between seasons. Essentially, I had two very major surgeries, and after gender confirmation surgery, I think it was 12 weeks to the day that I played my first game of the following season with the Sirens.
And with the Sirens, obviously that's a journey as well. To be playing in the Australian Women's Ice Hockey League and actually approaching the league, and putting your case forward, to be accepted into the league. How was that response from the league itself when you made that decision to put your hand up to apply to play in the league?
Yeah, look, I remember sending an email and stating my case. I'm not too sure that they knew who I was from an ice hockey perspective. I guess I'd been off the scene for some time at at the high level. I was playing some local league at Sydney Ice Arena uh, prior to that, but look, the response I got from them was um, it was open-minded, which initially I guess I expected maybe a little bit more hesitation or pessimism around it, but they were quite open-minded about it. And look, I wasn't even suggesting that I play for Sydney. I said, look, I'm happy to try out and see where I might fit. And they said, oh, listen, the Sydney Sirens are having a tryout, and I believe it was about 2 weeks after that email that I sent. So it was really fortunate with the timing. Um, it didn't give me very long to prepare for it, but I remember going to ISU in Sydney to get some extra time on the ice uh, and some training in preparation. And that's where I met Remy Harvey and her dad John for the first time. And I remember Remy coming over to me while I was doing some movement drills off to the side, and she said, "Oh, hi, how are you doing? Where do you play?" And I said, "Oh, I'm planning to try out for the Sirens." I had no idea who she was as far as the AW is concerned, and she's quite a legend, really.
Yeah, just a little bit.
And Remy was really encouraging. She's like, "Oh, that's great. You know, I play for the Sirens." And I was like, "Oh, excellent!" Like it's such a fortuitous meeting, and yeah, so it was a really exciting time, but it was also pretty terrifying. You know, having played at a high level many years before, I didn't even know if I still had it in me to play uh, at a high level. And I'll be honest, I was quite ignorant of what the AW level was like at that point. So I turned up at the tryouts and I did my thing, and the rest is history, I guess.
And there's one moment that you mentioned to me when, at the time, Sirens captain Mel Matheson was standing at the front of the rink, and she'd either waved you down or yelled out to you or something, and said the girls are getting changed over there, head into the change rooms. I know that speaking to people on this podcast, change rooms is a massive thing, and it can be very, very daunting, especially for queer people, people who are still questioning their gender identity or transitioning. Um, it must have felt amazing to have that acceptance from the Sirens and Mel.
Yeah, absolutely. That was actually at tryout number 2 for the Sirens. Tryout number 1, I actually got changed by myself in the corner of the rink, not even in a change room. I was literally ringside, but just over in a corner, and I just got changed there by myself. I didn't know what the boundaries were with the change rooms, so I didn't kind of force myself into there, and I was very unsure of myself. I got through change. I got through the first tryout, and when I arrived for the second tryout, when I was invited back for that second tryout, I was walking into the rink from the car, and like you said, Mel was standing out the front of the Penrith ice rink, and she called out to me and said, "Hey Ella, we're getting changed in the change room over there, and you should jump in there and say hi to the girls. Um, Join us there." So that was a huge relief, and it was actually pretty shocking to me that she singled me out to make me feel welcome. Not that I wasn't expecting it, but I wasn't expecting it.
Yep. I find the AW to be a very inclusive and accepting um, competition environment. Have you found that from day one, or is that something that's improved, especially for queer people within the sport?
I was really surprised at how many queer folk were in the league, especially on the Sirens in my first year. I was pleasantly surprised to see, a level of diversity and um, sexual orientation and um, from from the perspective that I don't know. I think coming into the AW, I just assumed that everyone was straight and narrow, and I was an outlier, but there was actually surprisingly a number of queer folk.
And you did return home to WA and play for the Perth Inferno. Um, I do have a question here from one of my colleagues at Hockey Hype Australia, Courtney. She just wanted to get your thoughts on your time at the Perth Inferno before coming back to the Sirens. What did it mean to you to go back and play for your home city, in your home state?
Yeah, it was again, it was a daunting time because I left I left Perth to live in Sydney in 2015, which was prior to my transition. I hadn't really been back very often other than to play. Um, I think I played a exhibition game prior to going back for the Inferno. So a lot of my friends and family hadn't seen me since my transition, and that included some friends that I played with in Perth in the old days. And I have found that when you go through transition, it's so much easier being. Uh, Let me rephrase that. It's so much easier for other people to meet you as your current identity post transition. Um, the people that knew me before, there's a level of change and acceptance that they have to go through themselves to reconcile who they saw previously versus who they're seeing now. And that was a challenge. Sadly, I think some of my friendships weren't the same post that. But look, it was exciting to play for Perth. It was their first year in the AW post their exhibition round series the year before, and I guess I wanted to give back to the hockey community of Perth that I benefited from so many years before. It was really touching how well I was accepted into the team. And a side note, I ended up playing with one of the girls on the Inferno, and I had played many years before with her grandmother um, when I was a player, and I've got a photo there of that. So it was it was kind of like stepping back in time in some ways.
Yeah, sort of going full circle, maybe.
Yeah,
Yeah, and while
yeah,
all this is happening, in 2019, there's a launch of the first Australian LGBT plus inclusive hockey club in Melbourne, the Southern Lights, and then in 2021 in Sydney, the Harbour Lights Ice Hockey Club is launched, which is the main reason why this podcast is here. Those two clubs, but this is where we get to the good stuff, because out of that, you attended the inaugural Harbour Lights skate, and at Harbour Lights, you've also found love as well. Um, just want to get your thoughts on the Harbour Lights and what hockey clubs like that mean to you, and how beneficial they are for queer people, especially hockey players, and how good is it to find love within those doors?
yeah. The Harbour Lights was uh, this amazing group of people that had so much energy, and quite a lot of them were fairly new to ice hockey, and it was like this beacon of hope and acceptance for anyone that was, I don't know, not necessarily comfortable enough yet to play in with the mainstream hockey crowd. Um, Being involved in the inaugural skate with Harbour Lights, I actually skated as a player. We thought it might not be too sporting of me to play as a goalie. So
Did you end up scoring about 10 goals though, or something like that?
I ended up scoring the only goal for my team. um, and that was great. I was even playing against some of the players and goalies that I'd coached, which is really nice. And I met my fiance through that. I was playing on the same team as her, and she and we developed something pretty special out of that.
um, who's the better hockey player out of the two of you?
Well, she's a defenseman. I'm a goalie. I appreciate my defenseman.
Yeah,
There's a
you're there
special
to
bond.
you're there to protect the defenders.
Sometimes it goes both ways. goalie gets a lot of protection from the defenseman, and sometimes it goes the other way. Yeah.
Have you seen? Have you seen? What are the positives that you've seen from for the LGBT community with teams like Harbour Lights and Southern Lights? What have you seen that? What have you seen that do for queer people?
I think it's given them kind of a support network within the hockey community. Um, I've certainly seen some people that are interested in ice hockey, and they're perhaps a little bit intimidated by some of the culture that, and I'm not necessarily talking about anti-queer culture or anything like that, but just that the sport itself, outside of those LGBTQI plus uh, teams, it's not apparently safe. It's not advertised as being apparently safe just yet. So I think it gives them like a launching pad if they're interested in playing hockey, or they've been playing hockey and haven't quite found their groove, or their people yet. And look, it is as much about the hockey as it is about a social network. I know that there's been a lot of friendships made, and through some of the Facebook groups associated with those things. Um, there's a lot of friendship and a lot of funny stuff that goes on that's not directly hockey related. It's just a, I guess, like glue. It glues people together, and it draws people in.
What's your favorite moment in hockey? And that could be inline, it could be ice hockey, it could be a favorite moment within queer hockey as well. Which I know if you've got something that a lot of people would love to hear. What's your favorite moment?
I get asked this quite a bit, actually. My favorite moment. Look, I think from a selfish perspective, my very first AW game, I posted a shutout, and I think the reason for that being so special was that it was confirmation that I was in the right place. It was a game against the Adelaide Rush, and I went into that game, and I don't think I'd ever been as nervous about playing ever before. I'd always been confident, and I had this doubt within myself. So it was a self confirmation moment. Yeah.
And what's next for Ella Licari? Um, you've got the Sirens hockey shirt on at the moment. Is it full force with the Sirens moving forward still?
Look, the roster is wiped clean every year. At this point, it's a question of, will they have me back, and will my body allow me to? um, I'll be 47 this year, so I'm getting a little bit up there in years. I always said to myself that I would keep playing the highest level I can until they stop picking me, or my body stops me. So look, it's still early days yet. We've got a season of AIHL to get through, and club level hockey to get through. We've got nationals coming up very soon. I'm just midway through the tryouts for New South Wales for nationals. So we've got a fair bit to get through, and I guess I'll see where we're at the time that they call for Sirens tryouts. But look, I think I've still got a little bit left. See.
I think if you're double stacking the pads and making saves like you did this season, and you're making our saves of the season at the end, I think that'd be crazy not to sign you up again.
We'll see. I guess we've got some really good talent coming through, and I'm excited to see what the future is. And look, I know that the future isn't going to be me starting games, but I would certainly love to be a part of developing who's coming through, or maybe refereeing. Who knows?
Well, I think there's big things with the Sirens. I really do. In the future, they've got a lot of young talent there. Before I let you go, is there anything that you want to plug? Anything you want to let the listeners or viewers know that anything's coming up? You can plug away.
Look, nothing off the top of my head, but look, certainly support your local AW team. The costs for the players is significant. The more support we get, the more people we get to games, the more people we get tuning in, the better it's going to get. Even compared to when I first started AW, what we have now feels so much more professional than when I started. So, yeah, support women's hockey.
Absolutely. The last AW season that we covered here at Hockey Hop Australia, it's the most fun I've ever had, and it's a great competition. So I totally agree. Get out and support women's hockey across Australia, and help it improve and get better. We are Pride and Puck Podcast. You can find us at the socials at Pride Puck Pod. We are part of Hockey Hype Australia Podcast Network, www.hockeyhypeaustralia.com.au. This has been Ella Licari. Ella, thanks for coming on the podcast.
Thanks, Andrew. Really appreciate it.
And we'll catch you all next time.